podcast world. Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk, No Chaser. Y'all know me from the podcast life, relationships, and everything in between. I go by Kev, nothing more, nothing less.
Hey, what's going on, podcast world? This is your student of life, tyerado, here to bring you some news, put somebody in the hot seat, and just sit up and talk. Let's do this.
Remember to check us out on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Straight Talk 315. Let's get into this podcast.
All right, what's going on, Kev? What's up?
Yo, what up?
It's been a while.
It has. And this is becoming a theme for us, so we need to get it together.
We do need to get it together. But listen, guys, we're here. We're ready to deliver some news, so let's just jump right into this, all right?
All right, so what's on the agenda for today?
So I've been following this story today. You know, I actually had a different news story I wanted to talk about, but this kind of came up. And, I just feel like this is something that's relevant. It's international news, but I just feel like this story just kind of parallels something that I feel like could happen to the United States in the future. So basically about 9 months ago, the president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, I think I pronounced his name right. If I didn't, y'all can hit me up and let me know what's good. He got elected like 9 months ago, and the problem in the Philippines is that they are like really saturated with drugs, particularly methamphetamine is like a huge problem in that country. So what this president decided to do is basically tell his people that they are freely allowed to murder drug dealers and drug abusers. And not only are they free to murder them, he will give them a medal and he will protect them by not sending them to prison.
Wait, hold on. This is the president of where?
The Philippines.
Really? And he's on record saying this.
He's on record as saying this, and obviously something like that breaks international law and it's against human rights. And he basically went on record saying he don't care about human rights. He wants the drugs out of his community. He wants the drugs off his street. And since then, and this has been 9 months, there has been over 7,000 murders in the Philippines, drug-related murders in the Philippines. And the people who are doing these murders are sometimes it's police officers, sometimes it's, drug gang leaders who are killing other gang leaders over territory, and they're using, they're under the cover of what's going on with this president that's protecting them. So not only is he protecting people who are vigilantes, he's protecting other drug dealers who are killing other drug dealers. There's people who are just going out, just slaughtering and murdering people and saying, okay, well, this person was on drugs, so it's like the selling witch trials, basically, going on in this country.
So weird. Now, and just, for all of our fact checkers and for the trolls, because anybody hearing this is not going to believe it. It sounds crazy. Do you have like some kind of website or where they could go to see this story?
All you need to do is Google Rodrigo Duterte, Philippines president, and it will come up in the news section. I actually watched this segment on National Geographic Explorer. It aired last Saturday, and I just played it. I watched it. I DVR'd it and played last Saturday. I watched it today, and they talk about it in detail. It's absolutely astonishing. And the crazy part about it is that he has an 80% approval rate in his country.
Really?
And what made me kind of sit back and think, because the man who did the story, he's an American, he flew out there, and he was actually interviewing the people, asking them what do they think about this new president and his policies. And they were saying things like, we really love this guy, he's not a normal politician, he speaks the way that we do, things like that. And it just started to make me think of the rhetoric that we would hear the same Trump supporters in our country say. This man doesn't care about anything. He doesn't care about anybody. He just has an agenda, and he's going to push it on people, and he doesn't really care who it affects. He doesn't care about the dangers of it,
Okay. So I don't know if this story has gained traction or if it's gaining traction now. What, if anything, if you're aware, what's the UN saying about all this?
They're not necessarily getting involved at this point, and I'm not really understanding why. And it may be because he has so much support from his own people, and that they're not feeling like they're being terrorized by their leader. Is like, who are them to say, to get involved. And as far as because I know that I'm not sure that the Philippines are part of NATO, which, I mean, obviously we may end up leaving NATO anyway in this administration because I feel like that's where Donald Trump is going, but a lot of people just don't care at this point. I mean, he's only been in office for 9 months. They have a 6-year term limit for presidents in the Philippines. I'm not sure if they reelect their presidents or you just serve your 6 years and then you're out and then somebody else comes in. I'm not sure how that works, but you know, it's been a quick 9 months when you're killing 7,000 of your citizens. You know,
of course. Now, I will say, I like the idea of 6-year terms, and I you know, part of me has always felt like they should change the way they structure the presidential terms in America. But having said that, though, I'm wondering, and you know, from my personal perspective, if any country would get involved with something like this, it would be America. I don't really see any other countries wanting to get involved. Mm-hmm. But what, if anything, do you think our government would be able to do about this? If this is something that's going on within those borders and under their law, how can America say it's illegal? Or how can we implement any type of repercussions for you know, these types of this type of governing?
America is not going to do a damn thing, and I'm going to tell you why. I just watched a piece on the PBS station out here about America now is starting to not be the police force for the rest of the country because this is what the rest of the world, this is what the Republican Party wants. You know, Donald Trump has been saying time and time again, America first, we need to stay out of, you know, other people's business and start yada, yada, yada. And that's one of the reasons why we got $1 trillion deficit, because George Bush wanted to police, you know, the entire world and just put us in this tremendous amount of debt. Barack Obama, who was criticized even by the Democratic Party, started to pull back a lot of the support that our country was giving other countries. And the Philippines is literally the least of our worries. If this was happening maybe in the Middle East, you know, we would probably be more down to get involved. Now, the Philippines are already in trouble with China because in the Philippines, fishing is a huge market there. Right. And China is starting to encroach on the Philippines. That they share like a bay where they all fish in. And now that China has overfished their territory, you know, China is a big powerhouse. Philippines is like, you know, like nothing to them. They're starting to encroach on their territory, saying this water belongs to us. And now they're starting to kill, you know, fishermen coming from the Philippines. So this country, you know, these poor people just really got it bad coming from everywhere. And I think even if America did get involved, it's going to create some sort of tension between us and China, which we don't need anymore right now, considering Donald Trump has a vendetta against China. So
not only do we need it, we don't want any issues with China. But just to go back, because it's real interesting what you said, and I agree. And if Donald Trump is taking these stands, then that'll be the first issue that I would agree with. I do feel like for decades, one of America's biggest problems is worrying too much about what's going on in everybody else's backyard, not enough in ours. And I do feel like that's one of the biggest problems in this country. So I think if that's going to be the policy going forward, it should be that. The only problem is, and we see it with a whole bunch of, you know, a slew of other issues, number one being healthcare. The problem is when you have a president that comes in, if there are any good initiatives put into play, what happens is if the next president comes in and doesn't agree, then it all gets reversed and we start back from square one. This would be one, if America's going to take the policy that, you know, we need to basically mind our own business and stop interfering with the affairs of other countries, that's a good policy, but it should be something that should be consistent going forward. And I think if we adopt that as a policy going forward, I think we will see a drastic decrease and hopefully one day the end to our national debt being what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I could not disagree with you more. But this is something that I would have to really delve deep into, and we definitely don't have the kind of time on this particular podcast. But I definitely want to go toe-to-toe with you on this subject in the future.
I'll just introduce this last tidbit. I mean, just if I think about it from a logical standpoint, we have the laws that we have in our country. Mm-hmm. We would not want to see, let's say, Russia or China, for example, start to come over here and say, look, we don't like the way you guys are doing things. Basically, we're not having it. I feel like every country, you know, if it's their land, it's the laws of their land, it's the way they do things, it's their culture. Let those people and that government deal with it. The same way we have to deal with our government when we have issues. I'd be real interested to know why you think America should put its nose into the affairs of other countries.
Well, I got that. It's something I would, in order to really give my full opinion, I would have to give the opinion why, and that could take a while. But the only thing I will say is that it's not necessarily about going into other countries and saying, okay, we don't want you to do this. It's about countries that break international law. The problem with us ignoring everything is that a lot of these countries, they will break international law, which can allow them to become powerhouses. What Russia now is doing in the Ukraine, terrorizing these people, bombing these people, destroying these people, because Putin thinks, well, they're Russian-speaking people, so we have the duty to go in there and do what we want to do, whether we're breaking international law or not. Obama threatened him, Putin, to not go into Ukraine. He did it anyway. And guess what happened? We did nothing. So basically that's sending the message to Russia, say, okay, now we could do whatever we want to do. But what happens is you can't go around terrorizing people. They're going to become a large powerhouse, and they're going to start monopolizing all of the little countries around them, destroying these people, terrorizing these people, and that's going to have a domino effect, and eventually it will reach the United States, and we will have a big problem on our hands, because it will literally be like, 1930 Nazi, it will be another World War III, where what Hitler was doing was going around, bombing these countries, taking them over, killing these people, doing what they wanted to do, and this is, it's going to create another one of that. And China is the same way.
Don't get me wrong, I do feel like, there are going to be cases where, this is what I feel, and I think it's the same thing on the national level, where we have separation of state, and we have state laws, and then we have the federal government, and then we have this kind of clash of the two. I think if these other countries seek help, that's a different thing. They do, but then sometimes you have these countries, like, for example, like with China saying basically, what's going on over there is between them and those other surrounding countries, and basically America has no jurisdiction. And the problem, because I feel like, look, there's jurisdiction that exists everywhere. Like, for example, if you're in, let's say, Linden, New Jersey, a Linden police officer can't follow you into Rahway and police that jurisdiction. There should be obviously rules and regulations, but at the same time, and this is why I think it sometimes has to be all or nothing, because what America does then is spend too much time and too much resources on international affairs, and the problem is not enough on domestic affairs, and that's my problem. If there can be a good balance, fine, but that hasn't been the case historically. Historically, it's always been that our federal government overlooks its own citizens, the issues here at home, and they worry so heavily on what's going on internationally, and I see that as being problematic. Anything to one extreme, it's not going to be.
I think Obama had the perfect balance. But the problem with Obama was he issued idle threats, and that's not something you should do. Don't sit up there and threaten somebody, and then when they do go against you, you just don't do anything. You cannot issue idle threats to people. Either let these people do what they're going to do, or if you tell them, okay, don't do it, and then they do it anyway. It's like if you tell a child, don't touch the damn hot stove, and then they touch it anyway, and you don't pop them, how are they going to learn their lesson? You know what I'm saying? I mean, obviously, Putin is nobody to fuck with. You know what I mean?
I don't necessarily see it as idle threats. What I think Obama had full intentions on backing up his threats. I think the problem is that when you're on that level, and then that happens, then you realize all the red tape. Sure. So here's the best way I can sum it up, because here's the problem. Here's why I say in a nutshell why I don't agree that we should be so worried about policing international affairs. Here's why. Because we're not on the same playing field as other countries. What I mean by that is the vast majority of other nations operate with presidents who are either allowed to be president for a longer period of time or an indefinite period of time. And when you have a government such as the one that exists here in America, there's too many balances and checks for power, and there's too much of a revolving door for our government. So when you have, a president who's been president for 10, 20 years, whatever it is, and then they're seeing our presidents come and go, they're not going to have that level of respect because they know that you're going to be gone in a few years and the next person's going to be in. So I think if we're really going to commit to making sure that we are the authority so that things are balanced around the world, then we really need to change the structure of our government.
See, and I disagree with that, too, because I'm going to tell you, the UN was created so we can establish an international law that everybody's going to follow so we can live in a civilized world, so we can trade, we can distribute, we can do this. Obviously, it's not necessarily working because we still have wars all over the place. But most of the wars are religious wars that we're battling. But with that being said, international law is bipartisan. So it doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with, who's the president or not. You know what I mean? It has to do with the fact that we all exactly, but we all supposed to abide by international law. All of us in the powerhouses, Germany, Russia, China, the United States, the UK, all should step in when you have territories disobeying international law because it puts everybody at risk.
Just said, there's a lot of shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I mean, on paper and in theory, I agree. Problem is, in the real world, things don't always work the way they do on paper, and that's really the only, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that should definitely be, if not our next episode, definitely in the near future, because it clearly seems like we got some discussion to embark on when it comes to this topic.
Oh, definitely. And I'm going to close this segment out really quick by just saying, if you want more information on this particular topic, I'm going to post a link about the Rodrigo Durante on our Facebook page, so you guys can definitely go check that out and read that story and Google him. Google it. It's all legit. It's all the truth. It's absolutely insane and it's very, very disturbing. The second half of the topic we talked about with the UN and international law and things like that, there is a book out by a gentleman named Brett Stevens, and it's called America in Retreat. So it talks about how America is starting to pull back from policing the entire world and the dangers of it. And it's also a documentary that's airing on PBS. Check your local listings, find that out. It's actually really, really good, and I highly, highly recommend it. And I recommend the book. I read the book. It's absolutely incredible. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to introduce a new piece that, me and Kevin has been talking about, an opinion piece to kind of drive traffic to our social media. We mentioned it in the opening, Straight Talk 315 at our Twitter, Straight Talking with Chaser on Facebook. And basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to post an article on there, something that's really poignant and important in our society right now. And I just want to get you guys' opinion. And if you interact with us on social media, I promise you it's either going to be me or Kevin. We will respond to every single comment. We will interact with you guys because we want you guys to be part of this platform, So I'm going to post an article about the Trump administration has decided to rescind money to the National Endowment for the Arts. Now, if anybody doesn't know how that works, this is a fund that the United States government gives to all art programs across the country. So what's happening now, there's a lot of all museums, all art education, all art programs, everything from, ballets to museums to small art programs to dance studios, PBS, which is one of my favorite stations on the planet. Everybody knows I love PBS, is in danger of losing funding. So it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Lots of small art programs, particularly who's going to be affected by it, is art programs in inner cities, obviously, because they're always the first ones to lose it because they need it the most. And it's going to create havoc because children need art, So I'm going to post this on Facebook. Please it's a video and it's also an article, so please watch it. Give us your opinion. We'll definitely chime in and give ours, because we're opinionated. So let us know what you think, you know what I mean? So that's that. That's your opinion.
All right, so what do we got for our main segment?
Our main segment, why don't you introduce the main segment? What's going on with this?
Okay, so you're definitely more politically driven than me. Anybody who knows me knows I'm more about the social issues. And when I say social issues, the things that we deal with every day, just regular people trying to get through life. So what I wanted to go into a little bit about today is kind of the dualism between how old school parents and, the last two or three generations versus, the current generation and generations moving forward, where, the way that we raise our kids, and particularly the old school kind of motto of kids should be seen and not heard. We anybody who's our age and older, we all remember when we were kids and, a room full of adults, don't speak unless you're spoken to, and, basically kids should be seen and not heard. The trend I'm seeing now, and I really want to know what Ty thinks about it and what the rest of you think about it, that's not how I'm seeing kids being raised now. I'm not saying right now at this point that I agree or disagree. I'm just introducing the topic. So let's get into it a little bit.
So you want to know how I feel about how it's being done now, or what I think is better or worse? I'm not a parent, so I can only go by my personal experience. And the way I grew up in the house, although I've had tons of cousins, obviously you know this, being my cousin, and, lots of friends in the neighborhood. I grew up in a household. I mean, my brother is 5 years older than me, you know what I mean? So he was kind of like, off doing his own thing. I was literally the only kid for many, many, many years in our house. And it frustrated me as a child to kind of have, because I did grow up in a generation where kids should be, seen and not heard, and, you need to keep quiet and stay in your lane and yada, yada, yada. I mean, that kind of upbringing in a positive light, it instilled a respect for adults. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of made me know, okay, I'm not an adult. I'm separate from them. I'm here to learn and be disciplined and be brought up by them and things like that. So in that respect, it was good. But in a way, I think it stifled my upbringing, especially socially. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like when you treat children like they don't have a voice or they don't have an opinion, it could breed a lot of insecurity. And I definitely grew up insecure as a child. And it wasn't intentional, and I don't necessarily blame, the adults around me for treating like that, because that's just how society ran at that time in history. It could breed some insecurity. It could stifle kids having their own voice, because all of that starts at home. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times parents think, okay, they'll find their voice at school or when they're hanging out with their friends or their siblings or stuff like that. But I think as a parent, it's important to get to know your child, because that's another thing that it doesn't do. It doesn't allow you to know you just look at this child as a child. You're not looking at them as a human being with a voice, with opinions, and things like that. And I think that is very troubling, because like I even notice now, even with my mom, like we're like best friends now. You know what I mean? But as a child, my parents treated me like I was a kid. Like, they didn't really necessarily listen to my voice or listen to what I had to say or thought I had an opinion or thought. And we all know that kids know a lot more than that we think they do, because we were there not that long ago. Right. We know that we knew a lot more than our parents knew. But as a child, we were smart enough to not to pretend we were dumb in certain situations, to pretend we didn't know certain things that we already knew. You know
what? I agree 100% on both. Both points that you made. From my perspective, on the one side, I definitely do feel like, when we were growing up, how we were raised, definitely did breed a lot more respect for adults and authority figures. But to the flip side, I grew up in a household where, my mom, for example, her attitude was always, I know more because I'm the parent, and that's basically it. And you're right. Not only does it stifle, not only does it breed insecurity, but I feel like it stifles creativity. When you drill into a kid's mind, throughout the years of their childhood and into their adolescence and early adulthood, that, basically your opinion doesn't matter. You don't know enough to know anything about life, and basically don't speak unless you're spoken to, and all these types of things. While that may come in handy, for certain things in life, at the same time, you're setting your kids up that when they finally do get from underneath your wing and they have to go out into the real world, they don't know how to express themselves. And that's a problem that I feel like is one of the many direct results of our generation struggling the way that we do in our adult relationships, because a lot of us are so used to not being heard or thinking that our opinions don't matter. And so by the time you hit adulthood and you realize that, the majority of how you were raised, it applies, but it doesn't apply in the real world, because now you have to think, speak, act, basically sink or swim for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us as adults, learned too late in adulthood from trial and
Yeah.
error because, it's just kind of the crippling that we had. And then my first book, not to shamelessly plug, but
no, plug away.
There's a chapter that basically it deals with this, and it basically talks about, how we're all responsible for our own journey, and we're all captains of our own destiny. And basically, there's a part in the chapter where I talk about how when we're kids and, we don't have the proper tools to, be able to think for ourselves and do for ourselves, we rely too heavily on our caretakers. And the problem is when you grow into an age where now you have to take charge of your canvas, that canvas is covered with everybody else's hands and with the things that they think you should be about. By the time you take control of that, you get this trial and error because now it's too late. And what actually sparked me wanting to talk about this topic, a close friend of mine, because we've gone back and forth on Facebook. I think you called her your spirit angel or some shit.
Oh, Lord Jesus. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she added me, too. What a nice girl.
So we always go back and forth about different things, and especially pertaining to parenting. And what sparked me wanting to do this topic is because recently she had told me a story about one of her kids, and an interaction that one of her kids had with one of the gym teachers at her school. And it's funny because, I feel like what we're talking about now spills into so many different aspects of life. And even though my children are young now, 5, 7, and 12, I don't raise them to not speak for themselves, not have a mind for themselves. And while I am a strict parent in some aspects, I don't necessarily, I don't discourage my kids from talking back. And when I say talking back, I don't mean in a disrespectful way. I mean, if they have an opinion, they're welcome to voice that opinion. And where I think that comes into play the most is I think a lot of authority figures and teachers, now they still want to treat kids that same way. And when kids do speak up for themselves, you have teachers calling parents and they want to feel like kids are being disrespectful. I'll make it clear to anyone, and I'll make it clear to any teacher who I ever have to have the conversation with, and I plan to. However you approach my child is how my child is authorized by me to respond to you. And that's just life. In life, respect should be the default, but the problem is, and I don't know if it's a trend nowadays because teachers and authority figures are getting younger and younger, and like you said, we all grew up, a lot of us in these very strict environments, and now that we're adults, it's trial and error. So now you have police officers, teachers, other authority and adult figures who are struggling with these things the same way regular civilians are, people who are not in authority positions or who are not charged with teaching, educating, and helping to raise our kids. They're struggling with these things too. So a lot of the premise that they kind of operate off of are faulty. I'd be the first to tell anyone, if you want my child to respect you, they've been fully raised and taught by both of their parents to do so. However, if you come at them in a disrespectful manner, don't be surprised if they come back at you the same way. And to further that, don't be surprised if when you have a conversation with me about it, I'm not going to be, I'm going to be the first one in line, depending on the situation, to back them up. Exactly. And that's basically why I wanted to kind of go in on that a little bit. So would you say then that, and seeing how we were raised, because I think it definitely takes, it's a learning curve, and it's a hard balancing act, because on the flip side, we're seeing parents now who were probably so inundated with that type of upbringing that now all parents who are, I'm going to even say under our generation, they want, mothers are younger, grandparents are younger, and they want their kids to be their best friend. Well, then you're taking it too far, because there is a balance. Like, you don't want your kids to ever think you're their friend while you're still trying to raise them and get them ready for life. But at the same time, you don't want to over-shelter them, because like you said, the things that we knew coming up that our parents might have thought we didn't know or have any knowledge of, we found out about it from our peers and when we went to school and things like that. But back then, it was a little more easy to police, the things that we consumed on TV and on radio and what have you, but we still found a way. Nowadays, It's impossible. Whatever you think you don't want your children to be exposed to, they're going to be exposed to it.
They've already been exposed to it.
Right.
You might as well assume they already know.
You might as well. And that's, you know, a lot of old school parents now, I feel like they cringe, you know, the grandparents now. They cringe at how much we allow our kids to be exposed to, because I allow my kids to be exposed to a lot. Obviously, you know, nothing that's outside of their comprehension at their level, but at the same time, I'm of the belief that if I don't expose my kids to it now or allow them to be exposed to it while they're still in a controlled environment, they're only going to go to school and hear about it there. And then you start to create, you know, that fascination, you know, within.
That can create confusion as well, because you want them to know from you. Because kids, when they're talking about these things, they may not learn it from adults. They may learn it from maybe an older sibling who don't have the proper information and are giving it to their younger siblings who are friends with your child, and your child is now getting the wrong information because you as a parent decided they need to stay in the child's place and they're not prepared for it. Well, guess what? They already know, you know?
Right.
Or they have they have the wrong information, you know?
Absolutely. And look, I'm not trying to bash parents, you know, the parents that we grew up being raised under, because look, they did the best they could with what they had. And a lot of them, you know, either they didn't have both parents or it was just a different time. And they were only, you know, you tend to raise kids based on how you were raised. And I think our parents in that generation tried so hard to give their kids what they didn't have that I think a lot of parents over-sheltered their kids, because sometimes it's not the good that you could do for your kids, and it's not about giving them what you didn't have. Sometimes it's also about letting them experience a little bit of the hard too in life, because that's really where the lessons come from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's so funny, and it's like when we have these kind of discussions, I could tell that we're both Libras because, you know, Libra is the scale, so me and you are always talking about balance, you know what I mean? Like looking for the balance, like looking for the way that it could work on both sides, you know what I mean? Which I'm always looking for, and that's like really like kind of the number one trait of being a Libra. But, you know, the way I look at it is that I think what's missing in the new generation is the respect for adults, is the respect for authority, because that was the gem that the way we were growing up, the way we were raised, that was the gem, you know what I mean? That was it. Like, I still don't even curse in front of people older than me. You know what I mean? Like, I still don't curse in front of my mother or any,
I'm kind of
you know what I mean?
Way.
Like, and it's like, it's like you just can be out in public and you could hear how children speak to their parents. You know what I mean? You know, very disrespectful, using foul language, you know, and all of this stuff. And I think that comes from, like how you were saying, you want your kids to be your friend. You want your kids to like you. My parents, and even my older uncles who were all adults, they did not care whether I liked them or not, because they were trying to protect me. You know what I mean? It wasn't about whether you like me or not. I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to raise you to be a decent human being when you become an adult. I had to learn as an adult to overcome the challenges of the way I was raised. You know what I'm saying? That's your duty as a human being. There's no perfect parents out there. There's no way to perfectly upbring your kids. It does not exist. It's not going to happen, because everybody, even children, are individuals, and you have to tailor your parenting to every child, but you don't always know exactly what to do in any given moment. But it's your duty as a human being, and I'm speaking to, if there's young people listening, if you're in your early teens and stuff like that, don't blame your parents for your upbringing. If they fed you, they give you a nice place to live, they disciplined you when they were supposed to, and you decide to mess up your life, that is on you, because it is up to you to say, okay, these are my shortcomings that I need to work on. You know what I mean? A little bit of it may be your parenting, but a little bit it may be your parents a little bit, but some of it is definitely you as the individual. You know, so my duty as an adult, when I started to become an adult, was to say, okay, these were the shortcomings. This is what I didn't get. This is what I didn't have. But this is what I do have. Play to your strengths and work on your weaknesses. You know, are these kids nowadays built for that? Are they prepared to say, to either go into adulthood and mess up their lives and blame their parent, or go into adulthood and say, okay, this is what I need to work on. This is what I need to do. And I think if you're being your child's friend when they're children, and I'm not even talking about like a 15 to 16-year-old, I'm talking about being your child's friend when they're like 6 or 7 years old, is the wrong thing to do.
Right.
You have to find that balance of allowing them to communicate, and be who they are and be artistic and be an individual, but at the same time, make sure they know you are the parent and you know best and you're trying to guide them in the right direction. You know?
Right, absolutely. And I think, the kind of template that I follow is, when your kids are under the age of 10, yeah, you kind of have to be a dictator at that point. I think it definitely comes down to the style of parenting too. And, when it comes, like, when you're in those earlier stages of life, before adolescence, before preteen, before that phase starts, obviously you have to be more of a dictator. But I think as your kids get older and come into themselves, and it does require you to know your kids because each kid is different, after that age where you realize your kids are starting to experiment with their independence in different ways, whether it be socially, whatever, you do have to become more of a mentor, which in that in that time period, it's more of a give and take. Now, what I will say though, as far as us coming up and the respect that we, we're bred to have for adults and authority figures, what I will say, though, about the adults and authority figures back then, it was more of a community. The adults and the authority figures, they were actually adults and authority figures. I think a part of the problem also is now some of the people who are authority figures to these kids now don't have it together. And so they don't even really know how to approach our kids. You know what I mean? Everyone wants to label kids as being statistics, and they want to look at the dynamic of the household and whether it's a single parent household versus, all these numbers come into play, and people forget you're dealing with real people, which I think you touched on earlier. I don't know. Like you said, there's no perfect parent. There's no perfect guide to being a perfect parent. And you really won't know until your kids are grown, like a lot of us didn't realize until we were grown, exactly what hang-ups we had. And I think until you get even later in life, to when you start to realize exactly what things you were missing or what things would have helped you more. But, of course, by then it's too late. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and again, I definitely wouldn't trade it for the world. Like, despite some of the insecurities that I had, being in my late teens and early 20s, that could have probably been tackled years before had parents really gotten to know me and gotten in depth with who I am instead of looking at me as a child. Despite all of that, I still would not trade my upbringing for the world because I totally believe that it takes a village to raise a child. I totally believe in that. The problem in 2017 is that village has extended far beyond the reach of the parents. You know what I mean? Most parents back in our day knew who their children were interacting with. We were allowed to go outside and play freely, even blocks away from our house, because my mother knew the mothers down the street. She knew the adults who, if I did something wrong, if I got in trouble, they would have snatched me up and brought my behind home for my mother to whoop my ass. You know what I mean? Like, but now your children nowadays their heads are buried in their computers and their iPads and their cell phone, and they're not only being raised by you, but being raised by whoever's on the other end of that. Because you're being raised by your peers. You're being raised by your peers. You're being raised by your friends, your aunts, your uncles, your parents, everybody. But now, because kids spend so much time on social media, that is also helping raising your children. You know.
And so in that instance, that's the only part where I think I would spin off a little bit. I agree. Back then the world was smaller. It took a village. But now being a parent and seeing, how some of the other kids, even taking a trip up the street to the bus stop, for my kids to get on the school bus in the morning, you realize more and more you don't want that village to raise your child. Because the only thing that I think people need to remain mindful of is that as time moves forward, the village changes. So now you got a lot of village idiots out here now. And to be and to be honest with you, as young as my kids are now and as impressionable as they are, definitely seek support from that village, but choose the members of that village, because the problem is the last thing I want is for anybody to impress upon my child or any of my children, as impressionable as they are, things that don't coincide with the morals that I'm trying to instill in them at this age. Because, at this stage in life, the ages that they are now, their moral compass is being calibrated. And the problem is when you have too many hands on that, you get contradictions and you get too many conflicting directions. And I think that creates a lot of confusion for kids too. You know what I mean? I think, back then it was a lot simpler. It was wrong and it was simple and that was it. And so when you did run across these other adults in the neighborhood, they were right in whatever they had to say to you.
Yeah.
Churches was in one community and, the teacher was a friend of your mom, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think now there's a lot more gray.
That terrorizes me, as somebody who plans to be a parent, to know that there are going to be adults within my vicinity that does not have the same moral compass as I do, as I do as an adult, you know what I mean? Because you want to think that everybody, if they're interacting with your children, has your children. Like if I interact with other people's kids, I have their best interests at heart, and you want to know that other adults, if they're around your children, have their best interests at heart. You know what I mean? Right. And sometimes it's not always like that, and it's like you can't really trust anybody. You have to treat every single stranger as a murdering pedophile. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you want your kids to treat them that way too, because you want to keep them safe, And
it's unfortunate, and maybe that's a part of the reason why kids are less respectful of adults now, because like you said, a lot of parents are scared, and they do teach their kids, look, if somebody says something to you, it is what it is. They're not your parent, whatever. And I think it's that fear, that leads to a lot of kids being conflicted, and maybe that's a part of it too.
Yeah. It's coming from so many different directions, and that's why it is definitely harder. I feel it has to be harder to raise kids nowadays than it was 20, 30 years ago. It has to be.
I don't know what it was like firsthand back then, but I do know what I experienced and what I was exposed to as a kid back then, and I'm seeing what my children are exposed to now, and the more technological advances that we are afforded as time moves forward, the more dangers present themselves. I mean, it used to be we were taught, don't open the door for strangers, and when you're out on the street, don't speak to anyone who you don't know or don't feel comfortable speaking to, whatever the case. But now these kids don't even have to leave their bedroom, because with Xbox and PS4 and all these things, and the chats and these video games, they can be speaking to someone halfway across the world or right next door who's a pedophile, like you said, and you don't know what's being communicated back and forth. And, the old school parents would say, well, fine, don't give them those freedoms. But then again, like we go back to our original point, you want your kids to have those experiences. You want them to be up on that technology, because as they get older, they're going to need to have knowledge of that, because this is where not only the jobs will be, but this is the direction that the world is going in.
Exactly.
You don't want them to be illiterate to that stuff either.
Yeah. All I got to say is this, and then I'll let you have the final word on this, since you actually are the parent. My last word is this. I just feel like the scary part about children now is that they're not really allowed to be children for that long. You know what I mean? They have to grow up a lot faster than we had to. A lot of these kids who are playing on the iPads, we were still playing in the damn mud. Making mud pies and playing freeze tag and climbing trees and doing all that shit. And these kids are, much more sophisticated, much more intelligent, using words that I probably would have to look up in the damn dictionary. You know what I mean? And it's kind of, in a way, it's good, but it's also kind of sad, because you want to see children be children. You want them to have that youth, that you had, that freedom, that innocence, that, that time to just play and not have a worry in the world. And I just really feel like kids had, up until a certain age, they do have it, but I don't feel like they had it as long as we had it. And our parents probably had it a lot longer than we had it. And I just feel like being an adult is now widening, Right. Kids have to become,
I think
you can have the final word on this.
So I think the biggest social detriment to our kids, when it comes to things like, let's say, video games, for example. Look, these kids might all be together in school at lunchtime, before homeroom, after school, and then they all run home and they jump on their video games online, and they're talking to each other through these headsets. And I think that's one of the big drawbacks for them socially. Our idea of that was playing Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat crammed all into one room, passing controllers back and forth.
Or even at a corner store with quarters.
Right. Right, at the arcade. But you had that social interaction, though. I think these kids are only learning how to interact socially with each other through these devices. And the problem with that is, you know, when conflict arises, these kids, look, 85% of communication is nonverbal. And I think a big part of the reason why so many kids are depressed, committing suicide, a kid should never even contemplate suicide. But the problem is, you know, back then we had to worry about something happening on Friday, and maybe by Monday or Tuesday the school knows about it. Now, something happens in homeroom, and before homeroom ends, the whole town knows about it.
The whole town knows.
You know what I'm saying? So, you know, my final thoughts will be this. Don't stifle, you know, your kids and take away the privileges that technology has afforded, but at the same time, you know, give them clarity, give them that kind of clarification that, you know, these things aren't the end all be all, you know, because the saddest thing is, you know, I would rather my kids grow up flawed, and I would rather them grow up and question, you know, my style of parenting, but at least make it to adulthood to be able to see the differences and make those changes for their kids than for one of my kids at 13 or 14 to be depressed and try to commit suicide because they don't have a grasp on the world. You know what I mean? That's my final thought about that.
That's what's up. Oh, that was a good segment. But
so let us know what y'all think. I mean, if I have nothing else to add, make sure y'all hit us up on social media. Y'all can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, The Theater Near You, Kevin C. Spruill. Definitely check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kevin C. Spruill. I put links for everything in the description of this podcast episode. But let us know what y'all think. Like Ty said, we usually, you know, we get notifications for anything, you know, that comes through the podcast social media, and we'll definitely hit y'all up directly.
Definitely. So I'm going to do my social media real quick, and then I have to throw two ratchetnesses in a hot seat.
Okay.
Speaking of bad parenting. But my name is Tyrone Desperado. That's my Twitter, my Instagram, and my Gmail. Hit me up. You know, with any question you have, any statements you have, whether you like me, whether you love me, if you hate me, I hate you. I'm kidding. But yeah, definitely hit us up. I mean, we're definitely interested in getting some feedback, hearing what you guys got to say. And if you have suggestions, you know what I mean, of how we can improve this, how it could be better, you know, definitely let us know. You know, we're open-minded. You know, we're ready to. We want this to kind of evolve and become this, you know, this huge thing, not just for us, but just kind of bring a community together of like-minded individuals who want to talk, who want to pick each other's brains and just kind of make this world a little bit better of a place to live in. Yeah, so definitely hit us up on our social media, Straight Talk 315 on Instagram and on Twitter, Straight Talk 315 at Gmail. That's Straight STRAIGHT TALK 315 at Gmail. STRATLK 315 at Instagram and at Twitter. All right.
Just to piggyback real quick off time before he goes into his last segment. Look, this podcast is supposed to, like Todd said, it's supposed to be a community. It's supposed to be a network, and we're very opinionated, but we're not going to have all the answers, and we don't even try to. The point is for you guys to all interact with us, for us to all come together, because we aren't going to change anything until we start having conversations. And it doesn't matter if we disagree. It really just matters that we come to the table and bring what we have to it. All right, so go ahead, Todd. What we got?
All right, I agree 100%. But listen, we was talking about parenting in the last segment, you know what I mean? And I definitely got to pick two of the worst parents, in my opinion, on the planet in a hot seat. And that's going to be 19 kids and counting fame, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Now.
Oh, God.
This is why they're in a hot seat. And you're going to say to me, Tyrone, why are you putting him in a hot seat? You should be putting Josh Duggar, their child molested son, in a hot seat. Well, what Mr. Josh Duggar done went and did is got his wife pregnant with their fifth child. Now, here's the tea, okay? His parents found him molesting his two younger siblings under the age of 8 years old and a family friend's child who was, I think, 6 years old at the time. Josh is 14 years old. So instead of these parents doing what they're supposed to do and getting this boy help, although I personally believe there's no help for pedophiles. I think it's a sickness, I think it's a disease, and it cannot be helped. Instead of getting this boy some sort of help or turning him into authorities, they decided to send him to a Christian camp and punish him by building houses for the summer. That was his punishment. Now, what I want to tell people, and I've actually done research on this, but I'm not going to talk about the specific research and draw this out, but people who molest children do not start molesting children when they're creepy old men. They start at sexual maturity, which is usually about 13 or 14 years old. When a lot of these pedophiles tell their stories, they tell stories of when they started doing this when they were children. So for the parents of this young man to not put this boy into a situation where he could get some sort of help or to do something else besides doing what they did was not only a disservice to their son, but a disservice to his victims. And it's absolutely disgusting that this man is now allowed to bring children or to be around children at all. He should not be allowed to be around his own children, and he definitely should not be allowed to bring more children into this world. And I just find this whole thing disgusting. I really am appalled by this. And they did a disservice to this young man when he was a child. And the simple fact that they're uber Christians, they're super religious, they follow the Bible to the T, and this man also cheated on his wife with an adult film star, beat the hell out of the girl, had two Ashley Madison's account where he was using his grandmother's credit card. For people who don't know what Ashley Madison is, it's a website that men sign up to for the specific reasons of cheating on their spouse. So that shows that this man is a sexual deviant, he's a pervert, he needs to be in prison, and he does not need to be around children.
In your opinion, real quick, do you think that pedophilia is a disease, or do you think it's just people making, sick choices?
I look at pedophilia in two different ways. Okay, there's some people who are sexually attracted to children, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't act on it because they know it's the wrong thing to do, because obviously you cannot help what you're attracted to. Whatever happens in your brain that caused that. But he's a pedophile and he's a sexual deviant, which means these are people who take advantage of weaker people, And all his siblings was because, I personally believe. Go ahead, sorry.
Do you think that directly stems from do you think it's true that people who are pedophiles, that at some point in their childhood that they weren't necessarily molested?
There's a lot of studies show that they typically were, but that's not always the case. You know what I mean? I think, I don't know if there's a different word to separate, somebody who acts on their sexual attraction to somebody who can't defend themselves, as opposed to somebody who just has that mental attraction, but they're not doing it obviously because they know it's the wrong thing to do. He did it, and he preyed upon somebody who could not defend themselves, who could not stand up for themselves.
Right.
And at 14 years old, you know better. You know what I mean? It's if he did it at 17, he's still a juvenile, but if he did it at 8, what's the difference between a 17 and 18-year-old?
Right.
What's the difference between a 14 and 15-year-old? At 14 years old, you know what you're doing, you know it's wrong, and you know it's hurtful, and it's despicable,
And look, I don't pretend to know enough about pedophilia and what goes on in the minds of these pedophiles. The only thing I will say about pedophilia is this. I don't agree with, and I don't like the way society differentiates male pedophiles from female pedophiles. And why I say that is because it's just as disgusting. It should be treated as being just as disgusting when a 30-year-old man molests a 16-year-old girl as when a 30-year-old woman does it to a 16-year-old boy. A lot of times in recent history, we see these high school teachers, right, sleeping with these middle school kids or sleeping with their students, and they get a slap on the wrist, a lot of them, the majority of the time. But when a man does it, it's like, oh, my God, lock them away and throw away the key.
Yeah, they all should be locked up.
Yeah, I think we send mixed signals. Just because it's a woman doing it doesn't mean that it should be any more acceptable than when a man does it. But society doesn't seem to feel that way in the majority of these cases.
The golden rule in this situation is that children cannot consent to sex with an adult. They cannot do it. Period. It just doesn't happen. Now, yeah, maybe as children, sometimes they experiment with other little kids and stuff like that, but it's experimentation and it's a natural thing, and a lot of young kids do it. We want to think that they don't do it, but they do it. Right. Some of them do, some of them don't. Obviously, some of them don't, but,
and then here's the only other problem with that. You look at other countries, and not even just other countries, but you look at, ancient times, right? These things weren't looked at as being bad things. They weren't looked at as evil or even being crimes. I mean, if you look into ancient history, and even look at some of these other countries, at 12, 13, you can be married and start a family. So I really wonder if it's just a modern day societal type of thing, or where did it switch, and what really is the reason for it?
Yeah. I can't even tell you, and I think that in certain societies, they probably, when they're allowed to, I am aware there are societies where maybe a 12-year-old may marry a 25-year-old, or a 12-year-old may marry another 12-year-old, but I think within that society standard, they may bring their children up to be prepared for that kind of life at a young age. In America, we don't do that.
But as a child,
we're not telling a 6-year-old, listen, in 6 years you're going to get married to this 35-year-old man, and this is something we're going to instill in you every single day of your life, and we're preparing you for this. That's not how we raise our children.
But even if that was the case, where science says that the frontal lobe is still developing even until you're 26 years old, is it even feasible that you could raise a child into that mind state that, look, when you're 13, 14, 12, whatever, you're going to, have to live an adult life and be married and, be sexually active? Could you even prepare a child mentally for that type of, because there has to be some drawback to that mentally, I would think.
Well, believe it or not, there's a lot of people out there that are advocates for pedophilia, that are actually actively fighting for children to be allowed to make decisions on having sex with adults if they want to. And their thing is, what their reasoning is that if a girl becomes sexually mature, meaning she starts to menstruate and stuff like that, at 9 years old, then that means she's old enough to decide that she can have sex.
Basically.
That's what their point of view is. They're all filthy.
Here's what I'm curious about, and I'm asking you because, obviously you can relate to it. As someone in the LGBT community, what would you say if these pedophiles started to gain traction and they start to say, look, the same way that you guys are now giving all these rights to the LGBT community and transgenders, we want our rights too. What would you, because look, let's be honest, regardless of the fact that so many people think it's sick, regardless of the fact that it's looked down on, what would you be able to argue, as someone, in the LGBT community, how would you argue against that premise? Because some of them are saying that.
Bill O'Reilly said it on his show, and I dragged him on Facebook. First of all, do not compare being gay, being lesbian, being bisexual to pedophilia, because not only do these people compare it to pedophilia, they compare it to bestiality and stuff like that. That is two different things, because I am not sleeping with children. I'm sleeping with another adult, two consenting adults. Now, two 12-year-olds want to go into their backyard and bang each other out, then that's fine, because they're both two 12-year-olds, but you're not going to sit up there and tell me that I'm a 30-year-old man and I want to make it legal for me to go have sex with a 12-year-old, Don't get me wrong, I know somebody personally who went to prison for pedophilia who had consensual sex with a 12-year-old. It wasn't even forced. You know what I mean? But the problem is, if my 12-year-old, I found out they had sex with a 30-year-old person, I don't know if they were coerced. I don't know if they were bribed. I don't know if it was consensual. I don't know if it was forced. I don't know if they were threatened. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you just can't mix that,
And the thing is, the law says that even if they say it was consensual, the law says that they're not of age to make that consent. So
exactly. And we need to have a line drawn, and that line is drawn at 18 in some states, at 17 in some states, at 16 in some states. We need a line somewhere. So whether that line does represent everybody, it probably don't. You know what I mean? Because if you can get emancipated at 14 years old, I'm pretty sure you could decide at 14 I want to sleep with the 35-year-old, but that line has to be drawn somewhere. You know what I mean? And we had to pick an age, and the age was picked when it was picked, and I'm for that line. You know what I mean? And I would not even get into a discussion with somebody who's trying to I know you're playing devil's advocate, and that's actually a good thing.
Well, no. I don't want people to accuse me of playing devil's advocate. I just knew that there would be, that would be an argument, and I was just curious how.
Yeah. Because I brought up the argument. Well, I brought up the argument originally by saying how these people would say, okay, if a 9-year-old is menstruating, she's, just like if a 9-year-old boy starts to get erections, they would also say, well, he's ready to decide whoever he wants to have sex with because now he's having erections, So.
Well, I'll qualify it by this: come after my 12-year-old and see what happens, and we'll just leave it there.
Lord Jesus.
All right. So
Darren Hosty. All right. So we're gonna wrap this show up. Are you ready to wrap it up, or you got something else to say?
No, I'm ready to wrap it up.
All right, so we're going to wrap this up by saying today is National Autism Day, and we know that there's a lot of families in this country that are struggling with children that are autistic, and we just want to say, on behalf of myself and Kevin, our hearts go out to you. We know it's a struggle for these parents to go through these with their children, and we just want to bless you, say God bless you, keep up the fight, keep up the hard work. Make it happen. If you want more information on National Autism Day or autism in general, you can check out the website, autismspeaks.org. It's a great website. I was actually doing a little research and reading stuff on it. It's a really factual website. It has a lot of good information. Get involved. Help these families. They need a lot of help. They need a lot of volunteers, especially when these children become adults and the funding isn't there for them because now they're adults and these parents need a lot of help. So please check out that website and, and get involved, you know what I mean? So I think that's it.
All right, that works. Listen, if you listen to this podcast and you think that we're too opinionated, it's meant to be that way. If you listen to this podcast and you think that we're too negative or we're too far on one side versus the other, it's that by design. It's always been a motto of mine that sometimes you have to be profane in order to be profound. So when you hear me using profanity, it's not just for the sake of doing it. Sometimes there's a deeper meaning in everything. I don't pretend to know everything. I just know what I know. And me and Todd see y'all in the next one.
All right, man. Take it easy. God bless.
Thanks again for taking the time to listen to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We definitely value y'all feedback, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you got an idea for our next episode, maybe a topic you want to hear in the future, or if you even want to be a part of the show, hit us up at straighttalk315@gmail.com.